I am Daniel. I'm 34 years old, and the woman my father married 5 years ago looked me dead in the eye across a mahogany table and told me I was getting absolutely nothing from his $58 million estate. She even straightened her posture when she said it, like she was accepting an award. But before I tell you about the moment the lawyer reached into his briefcase for a second envelope and why that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I read every single one. The offices of Caldwell and Merritt smelled like old certainty. It was the kind of place where the carpet was thick enough to muffle bad news, and the leather chairs had absorbed decades of other people's grief. I sat on one side of the conference table in a charcoal suit I'd bought for my cousin's wedding 2 years prior. The shoulders pulled a little when I moved, but I kept still, so it didn't matter. Across from me sat the performance. My stepmother, Vivienne, was 53 and spent considerable energy ensuring nobody could tell. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly rent, technically black, technically mourning clothes, but the kind you'd see at a charity auction rather than a graveside. Her jewelry caught the overhead light every time she moved, which was often, because Vivienne always needed to be noticed. Next to her was her son Cody, 26, my stepbrother by paperwork only. He was leaning back in his chair with the comfort of someone who had never once questioned whether he deserved to be in the room. He was on his phone, cycling through something that made him smirk periodically. And then there was her daughter, Amber, 23, who was reading a lifestyle magazine she had not even tried to conceal. She had folded it to a page about boutique hotels in Portugal. I'm just saying, Cody announced to the room without looking up. The broker said the ski chalet in Telluride needs a decision by end of week. If we're liquidating, we should move the mountain properties first, and hold the city assets while the market corrects. He said it the way someone says a thing they learned yesterday but want to sound like they've always known. We'll handle everything, sweetheart, Vivienne said, adjusting one of her rings. Let's just get through the formalities. I was thinking the apartment in Chicago, Amber said, still reading. Top floor, 2 bedrooms, minimum. I need 1 room for work, and 1 room that just has good light. You can't put a price on good light. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs under the table. My father, Gerald, had been gone 11 days. They were already dividing him into square footage and ski lifts. Vivienne turned her gaze to me then. It was the kind of look you'd give a stranger who wandered into the wrong waiting room. I'm surprised you made the trip, Daniel, she said, her voice carrying the particular sweetness of someone about to say something unkind. I know Portland is a haul, and taking time off from the firm you're still doing project coordination, yes? That's sweet. I managed construction logistics for a regional infrastructure company. It was demanding, precise, skilled work. Vivienne had always described it the way someone describes a hobby they find vaguely embarrassing. I'm here to hear my father's final wishes, I said. I kept my voice level. I had practiced keeping my voice level. His wishes were made very clear, Vivienne said. Gerald and I updated everything 4 years ago. Right after we returned from our anniversary trip to Monaco. He was very deliberate about wanting his estate to stay with his immediate family going forward. She let the word immediate do its work. I didn't answer. I thought about the last real conversation I'd had with my father, 6 weeks before he passed. His hands had been unsteady by then, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in years, actually. He had gripped my wrist and made me promise 2 things. First, that I would not argue with whatever was said in that room today. Second, that I would find time to speak with Arthur Caldwell alone before I drove back to Portland. Just wait, Danny, he had said. Let the room breathe. Let them show the lawyer exactly who they are. So I sat. And I watched. And I let them show the lawyer exactly who they were. Mr. Caldwell will see you now. Arthur Caldwell was in his early 70s, compact and unhurried, with the kind of face that had made its peace with everything the world could throw at it. He had been my father's attorney and closest friend for 37 years. He had taught me to play chess in this very office when I was 9 years old, visiting Dad during school holidays. Today, he looked different. There was a careful stillness to him. The way a person looks when they are holding something heavy and don't want to spill it. We arranged ourselves around his desk. Vivienne claimed the center chair with the ease of long practice. Let's keep this efficient, Arthur, she said. We have a property manager coming at 3. Caldwell folded his hands. First, my sincere condolences on the loss of Gerald. He was one of the finest men I've known in 40 years of practice. Thank you. Yes, it's been devastating, Vivienne said in a tone that suggested it had been mildly inconvenient. The will. Caldwell opened the first folder on his desk. I have here the last will and testament of Gerald Thomas Harmon, executed 4 years ago. He began to read the primary distribution. The language was exactly what Vivienne had promised. The estate. Substantially. To her. Provisions for Cody and Amber's living expenses. And one line, clean and final. Specifically excluding me by name. Vivienne's face arranged itself into something close to sympathy. the expression of someone enjoying their generosity and not saying, "I told you so." "I'm sorry, Daniel," she said, sounding nothing of the sort. "Your father made his feelings clear. You were never truly present for him. You missed birthdays, holidays. I missed them because you changed the location and didn't send me the updated address," I said. Still level. Still calm. My father's voice in my ear. "Let the room breathe. That's simply not." "Mrs. Harmon," Caldwell said. His voice had shifted. Not louder, but denser somehow. Like the air pressure in the room had changed. "Before you continue, I need to ask you something. In the 4 years since this will was drafted, did Gerald ever ask you about the Harmon Holdings structure? The trust framework?" Vivian blinked. "He discussed the business with me occasionally. Yes." "Did he ever specifically walk you through where the assets were titled?" "The assets were in his name. Obviously." Arthur Caldwell reached into his briefcase and removed a second envelope. It was sealed with a wax stamp, old-fashioned, deliberate. The kind of thing my father did when he wanted something to feel permanent. Caldwell set it on the desk between them, and something about the weight of it made the room go quiet. "Gerald gave me this 18 months ago," Caldwell said. "He asked me to present it at this reading, after the original will had been read in full. He was, I'll note, extremely specific about the sequencing." "What is that?" Cody asked. His phone was down for the first time. "This," Caldwell said, breaking the seal with a letter opener, "is the restated declaration of the Harmon Family Trust, along with a complete accounting of asset retitling completed over the course of the prior year." He placed the document on the desk and smoothed it flat with his palm. "Gerald resigned as trustee of this trust 14 months ago. At the moment of that resignation, all assets held within it transferred automatically and irrevocably to the named successor, trustee, and sole beneficiary." Vivienne leaned forward. Her composure was still intact, but only just. "And who is named?" Caldwell looked at me. Not unkindly. With something that resembled relief. "Daniel Gerald Harmon," he said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Vivian moved through several emotions in rapid succession. Confusion came first, genuine, unperformed confusion, which was the most honest I had ever seen her. Then calculation, as she tried to find the angle. Then fury, hot and immediate, when she couldn't. "That's not possible," she said. "I was with Gerald every day for the last 2 years. I managed his appointments, his correspondence. He didn't see lawyers without me. He did not see this lawyer at his home office," Caldwell replied calmly. "We met at a private location, on 4 separate occasions over a 14-month period. Gerald was thorough. He did not want the process interrupted. He was ill," Vivian said. And I could hear the strategy forming in her voice even as she spoke. "He wasn't competent to make decisions of this magnitude. I'll have it challenged. I'll have the entire thing thrown out on capacity grounds." Caldwell nodded slowly. "I expected you might say that." He reached back into the folder. On the day Gerald signed the restated trust, he submitted to a full neurological evaluation administered by Dr. Pamela Reyes, the chief cognitive specialist at University Medical. The evaluation took 4 hours. It included written assessment, verbal reasoning, financial comprehension testing, and a recorded interview in which Gerald explained in his own words every decision reflected in this document, including his reasons for each one. He slid the report across the desk. He scored in the 91st percentile for his age group. "Dr. Reyes has confirmed she is available to testify." Amber had put the magazine away. Cody was sitting upright for the first time since we'd entered the building. "The recording," Vivian said carefully. "What does he say in it?" "Among other things," Caldwell said, "he discusses the events of the past 4 years in considerable detail. The dates on which you restricted his phone access. The names of friends who told him they stopped visiting because they felt unwelcome. The funds redirected from his personal accounts to cover expenses he was never shown. He is quite specific." Caldwell's voice remained completely neutral. "He was a thorough man. We're family," Vivian said, pivoting without shame. "Spousal rights, elective share. Whatever he put in a trust, I have legal entitlements as a surviving spouse." "You do," Caldwell agreed. "And those entitlements apply to assets in Gerald's personal estate at the time of his death." He opened the ledger. Gerald's personal estate at the time of death consisted of his personal vehicle, his watch collection, and $1,200 in a checking account. Everything else, the properties, the investment accounts, the business holdings, was retitled to the trust 14 months ago. The elective share calculates against the personal estate. Vivian stared at him. "Your entitlement," Caldwell said, "is approximately $400. I want to tell you what it felt like in that moment. Because people always ask. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like the end of something very long and very exhausting. Like putting down a bag you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten it wasn't part of your body. I thought about the morning 4 years ago when I drove 6 hours to visit my father for his birthday and found the gate code had been changed. I thought about calling his cell phone and getting Vivian's voice instead. Calm and certain, telling me he was resting and would call me back when he felt up to it. He never called back because she was answering his phone. I thought about my father's housekeeper, a woman named Constance who had worked for our family since I was 7 years old and who my mother had trusted completely. Vivian had let her go in the 3rd month of the marriage, citing a vague concern about missing petty cash. Constance had found me at a gas station once, just to tell me she was worried about him, that he seemed lonely, that the house felt different. I had spent 4 years being managed out of my father's life so carefully and so completely, that sometimes I had started to believe the version of events Vivian presented to the world, that I was the absent son, the one who didn't care, the one who had drifted away. But my father had been paying attention. Quietly, patiently, at considerable personal cost, he had been paying attention. "I want everything audited," Vivian announced, pulling herself together. "I want forensic accountants. I want to see every transaction from the last 2 years. "You're welcome to request that," Caldwell said pleasantly. "You'll need to fund it privately, of course, since you won't have access to estate accounts. But there is something else you should be aware of before you decide how to proceed." He pulled out one more document. This one was thinner. A single stapled report. "Gerald retained an investigative firm 2 years ago," Caldwell said. He had some concerns about the management of his personal health care. Specifically, he noticed he felt unusually fatigued on days following certain medications, despite his doctors not having increased dosages. He paused. He had a private blood panel conducted. The results were reviewed by 2 independent physicians. The air in the room changed in a way I still find hard to describe. Even I hadn't known this part fully, until this moment. The panel identified the presence of a sedative compound at concentrations inconsistent with his prescribed medications, Caldwell continued. Gerald documented the dates, cross-referenced them against the household schedule, and prepared a full report which has been held in my keeping since 11 months ago. He looked at Vivian steadily. He chose not to go to authorities at that time. He felt the evidence, while significant, was circumstantial. And he did not want his final months consumed by a legal process he might not live to see completed. Vivian's manicured hand was resting on the table. I watched it go still. "However," Caldwell said, "that report exists. It is documented, witnessed, and preserved. Gerald left instructions that it be disclosed to you directly in this room, so that you understood the complete picture." He folded his hands again. "He also left instructions that the decision about what to do with it belongs entirely to Daniel." Everyone looked at me. I thought about what my father had said. "I don't want my name turned into a headline, Danny. I want to go quietly, and know you're all right." "I'm not filing anything today," I said. "But I want to be clear that the report doesn't disappear. It stays exactly where it is. And how it's used going forward depends entirely on the choices made by the people in this room from this point on." Vivian understood. I watched her understand it. The practical matters were settled within the hour. The will distributed Gerald's personal effects. To Vivienne, $1. To Cody, $1. To Amber, $1. Caldwell placed 3 crisp bills on the table with the quiet precision of a man who had been looking forward to that moment for some time. The eviction notices, formal, legal, and already signed by a judge who had reviewed the trust documentation the previous week, were served in the conference room. Vivian had 36 hours to vacate the primary residence. A property management firm would be present to inventory and supervise. She left without taking the $1. 6 weeks later, I drove up to the house for the first time as its legal owner, and stood in the driveway for a long moment before going inside. The place felt both familiar and foreign, my childhood home wearing a stranger's clothes. The first call I made was to Constance. She was working at a dry cleaner's in the suburbs, had been since Vivian let her go. When I asked her to come back, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Your father used to leave envelopes for me with Thomas at the nursery down the road. Did you know that? He never stopped trying to look after people." I did not know that. But it didn't surprise me. The second call was to Thomas, who managed the property's grounds and had been quietly loyal through the entire ordeal, functioning as my father's off-grid communication channel in the final year when everything else had been monitored. Thomas came back the following Monday. He replanted the back garden from scratch, starting with the roses my mother had chosen when the house was first built. Yellow ones. "They come back stronger after a hard season," he told me, which I think he meant as more than gardening advice. I found the hidden notebook in the 3rd drawer of my father's desk, exactly where his letter said it would be. It was a private ledger, handwritten, meticulous, tracking donations he had made over 4 years to people who had worked for him, cared for him, or simply needed help. Former employees, neighbors, the daughter of a groundskeeper who needed tuition. Small entries, consistent, made quietly while Vivian wasn't watching the right accounts. He had been running a private act of generosity out of the back of his desk drawer for 4 years, using whatever funds he could move without triggering scrutiny. While she watched the front door, he had been building something real through the garden gate. There was a note at the back of the ledger. Danny, the money is the easy part. Keeping it from making you someone smaller than you are. That's the work. Use what you have to make things easier for people who deserve it. That's the only point of any of this. Love. Dad. I proposed to my partner, Renata, in the back garden on a Tuesday evening in October, under a sky that had gone the color of an old painting and smelled like damp soil and roses. She said yes before I finished the question. The ring had been in my father's desk too, tucked in a velvet box beneath the notebook. A simple solitaire he had given my mother decades ago, which he had quietly moved to the hidden compartment the day Vivian asked him what had happened to it. He told her he'd misplaced it. He'd been protecting it for me. A year later, standing at his grave with Renata and a son not yet born but already named, we had decided on Gerald. The only name that made sense. I tried to find the words to describe what the previous 12 months had actually been. Vivian was living in a 2-bedroom rental across the county. The insurance investigation connected to the sedative findings, tipped anonymously to the relevant authorities, had resulted in a civil settlement that had cleared her accounts. Cody had relocated and was, by all accounts, working an honest job for the first time in his adult life, which I genuinely hoped was doing him some good. Amber had moved back with relatives and, according to mutual acquaintances, seemed to be figuring things out. I didn't feel triumphant about any of it. I felt the way you feel when a storm that has been sitting on the horizon for years finally moves on, and you realize the damage it left behind is manageable, and that you are still standing, and that there is still time. The trap only works, my father had told me, if the prey thinks it's safe. He wasn't talking about cruelty. He was talking about patience. He was talking about the difference between reacting and waiting, between making noise and building something that lasts. I knelt and placed the yellow roses against the headstone. The engraving read, Gerald Thomas Harmon. He built quietly, and it stood. I chose that line. It took me about 30 seconds to think of it because it was simply true. We're okay, Dad, I said. The house is warm again. And I'm going to try to be the kind of man who deserves what you left me. The wind came through the trees above the grave. It sounded, for just a moment, like someone exhaling with relief. To everyone who has listened this far, maybe you have your own Vivienne in your life right now. Maybe you're being edged out, talked over, or made to feel like you don't belong in a room that should be yours. Maybe justice feels like a rumor someone told you about a long time ago. Here's what I know. The quiet people are often the most dangerous ones to underestimate. Not because they're planning something cold, but because they're building something real. And real things last longer than performances. Hold the line. Trust the people who show you consistency over time. And never mistake someone's silence for surrender. I'm Daniel. That's my story. And right now I'm going home, where Constance is making something that smells extraordinary. Thomas is arguing with the rose bushes. And Renata is waiting with her feet up and every right to be comfortable. Stay well, everyone. I'll see you in the comments.